Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to our Capture Live studio, where today I'm very happy to have with us Sarah Clausen from EDC.
Thank you for inviting me.
Welcome. And the topic of the day is colors, and we are going to be talking about color mixing and visualization of colors. And we have the most elaborate studio setup we've had so far, so we're going to start with a brief studio tour, starting with the console. So we have an EDC Geo AT5.
Yep.
Running the EOS
family software.
EOS family software, yes. This is connected to some kit over here, where we have an EDC LED source 4, lighting up a white surface and a multicolored surface. And so the surface on the right with all the colors is a fabric that we've hung in front of a white surface. And yeah, and this is run by the Geo. And in addition to that, we also have a capture visualization running here that we will be using to show you how reality compares to the visualization of what is the same setup in capture. I also have my iPhone here, through which I will be hopefully getting some questions relayed from you. We'll try to answer them throughout the webcast.
Absolutely.
Yes. So let's start with some basics, I think.
Yeah, let's talk about what fixture manufacturers have done to poor old Lars here. Color, right, used to be simple. We all had books filled with gel, medium, that we could say we want to pick a color, we find it, we pick it out of the book, we stick it in front of a lamp that puts out white light, and the color filter is going to filter out all the bits that in this case aren't this shade of green and only allow this shade of green to pass through. And if you didn't like this color, you would pick a different gel and drop it in front of the light. So this was a known entity, the lamp is a known entity, the color temperature of the lamp is a reasonably well-known entity, and it was reasonably simple to be able to visualize what this gel would do in front of that particular lamp. Yeah. This, of course, led to the color scroller, which means multiples of these in front of the same lamp, which of course led to the ideas of gel faders, and onto CMY systems and RGB systems, which are color fading, color mixing systems that we know from moving lights and from LED fixtures. Those color mixing systems are also, correct me if I'm wrong, reasonably easy to abstract out for a visualization system. CMY, RGB are relatively known points in the color spectrum, and you can get a pretty good idea of what that beam of light's going to look like, right?
There are some variations of the dichros in different moving lights, but it's essentially still CMY, so.
Right. Yeah. So you have a sensibility of what you're going to get when you dial in a half cyan plus a full magenta, that kind of thing. Since then, fixtures have gotten slightly more complex with LED, because with CMY and RGB, it was nice because any color that you want to make or want to pick out of a color picker like we have here only really has one recipe, as we say. There's only one value of R and G and B that's going to get to you to a pixel on that color picker. RGB, though it's promised to give you every color in the rainbow, anyone who's used it knows that in some cases it can be a little lacking, especially in whites or in tints, that kind of thing, because a red LED plus a green LED plus a blue LED have different intensities. They have different, what's called binning, which means their accuracy can be off. And if you're not really careful, what you get is not necessarily what you expect all the time. So as manufacturers, we start adding colors into the system in order to make up for RGB not doing what's promised as a pure primary type of color. So now you have RGBW or RGBA as simple additions to try and expand that color gamut, that color range a little bit. And that starts introducing a level of complexity in the light fixture that I think tends to make people like Lars go a little nuts. And that's because the way that you make the color has multiple points in it instead of one, and the way that you can mix a single color may change. And we'll see if we can get to this a little later, but it's an idea called, depending on how you want to pronounce it, either metamerism or metamerism. And it's the idea that you can get to a color in different ways using different mixes of LEDs. The simple explanation of that is an amber color. You can mix red and green and get an amber color out of your fixture. If you have an amber LED, you can turn that on and get an amber color out of your fixture. But the behavior of those two colors on stage are going to be different because of the way they're mixed. Even though on a white surface they may look the same. So when we get to the modern era of the X7 system that we actually have 7 different colors inside that fixture, which just increases the number of recipes you can use to create a color. And it also increases the depth of the color, the naturalness of it, what we would call the quality of that color, because it renders skin, it renders costumes, it renders scenery better, because you have all those wavelengths available to you.
Yes.
So I think we want to do a trick.
Yes, we do. So we're going to do a trick with a fixture over here. So if we could get the video from the projection area combined with me here. Sarah is going to take the lens tube off the source 4 fixture, which creates this amazing disco effect. And what you're seeing now actually are the colors inside the housing of the fixture. You can see this hexagon shape. That's essentially the plate that the LEDs are mounted to.
Yep.
So I'm going to step through a few steps here where we are lighting the individual colors. So we have the red here, the amber,
lime, an interesting color, green, cyan, blue, and indigo.
And as you notice, if I were to go back here again, we have more red LEDs than we have of the indigos, for instance. And that is because the intensities are different between colors. And, well, Sarah, if you want to explain, well, you've picked different amounts of LEDs to have good versatility when you use different colors. So
correct.
They are fairly balanced, but also work well in the situations that your fixtures are used in.
Correct. We've designed these for optimal usage to illuminate, to act as front lights, actually. I'll just throw this lens tube back in here for a moment.
Yeah. So notice now that Sarah puts the lens tube back on, that all these individual dots now turn back into this nice white beam again. So combining all those LEDs creates this white beam, actually. Of course, this poses a challenge for capture because, and I like to talk about color visualization as 3 generations. And what we used to have before is what I call generation 1, where a lot of the colors in the visualization were approximate. And that worked fine when you had RGB fixtures or even RGB amber fixtures, because we used the primary red, green, and blue of the computer, which when you combine them, you get white. So it looks convincing, but in fact, it was all just an approximation and not very exact. So when you go to a 7-color fixture, if you use approximate colors of that many colors, the end result is going to be very imprecise. So the naive approach is to, well, let's not use approximate colors and use the exact colors instead. So I have a slide that I would like to show you. If we could bring up the slide here. So I've overlaid the 7 color points on the CIE XY gamut, and these are the 7 points that the LED source 4 has. You can see that it creates this sort of mountain or tongue-shaped area. And if we were to represent these colors exactly, we run into a problem. That is that this triangle inside here, this is the traditional RGB of a computer, and it is much smaller than the area of the colors that the source 4 can produce. And what that means is that a lot of the colors the source 4 can do are more saturated than your computer screen could ever show. So it's almost 50% black and white in effect. So in order to make this work, you need to use a different color space than the old school RGB of computers and move to something a bit more modern, which is represented by what is presumably right here, the bigger triangle, which is the ACES CG color space, which comes from the motion picture industry, where they had a need to get CG graphics imagery working alongside with imagery shot with professional video cameras without having weird color differences. So this is what I would call generation 2, and what we have introduced with Capture Nexum is the ability to handle the colors in a scientific manner rather than just going, this looks lime, which is what we did before. And it means that as you start combining these 7 colors, you actually get on screen the proper color as opposed to something wildly close to what it should be. So let's move on to making a few practical experiments. So I think maybe we should switch to the shot where we see the console along with us first. So I'll let you introduce the viewers a little bit to what we're seeing here on screen, perhaps.
Sure. So these are the EOS color controls, or a few of them. Actually, there's a number of color spaces you can use. We've chosen to use the one that actually looks the most like the image that Lars just showed you of the color space that Capture's working in. So what's nice about that is that on this color view here, you can see the large triangle that is that optimized RGB space. And hopefully you can see a gray line that matches those points that Lars showed on the big diagram of the color points of the emitters of the X7 system. And pretty much everything inside that gray line that's also inside this triangle is something that the console can send out and falls within the space that Lars can visualize. Along with us, we have a couple of different tools. We, of course, have a gel picker, which allows us to choose our virtual versions of these things inside the console to send to that 7-color system to try and get them as close as possible to what we expect to see with a gel on conventional light. Next to that, we have a view that shows you a multicolored system in spectral view. And I can use that view to see what that color curve would look like, or the combined output rather, and then what each of those emitters is doing inside that space. If I want to get into those new recipes for colors, that's the kind of space where I can see how adjustments get made and what impact they have on the resultant color. One of the interesting things that we can do in this system is use a function called hold color point. Now I've got white light out there at the moment, which is not necessarily the most exciting, but if I pick a color,
should we switch to the...
We could have both and see what happens, because this will actually be a little bit interesting.
So let's add the computer view to the...
Do we see all three?
To us. No, I think it's either us and the computer or the computer and the fabric.
Whichever you like.
So let's start with us and computer. Let's start with computer and fabric. Yes.
Okay.
So you're seeing the projection we have in reality next to the Capture project.
Right.
Which was made by taking a photo
Correct.
of the cloth or the fabric we have with the print. And we've rigged it in the virtual setting the same way as we've rigged it here in the studio.
Correct.
So, sorry.
Nope, that's all right, because this brings up an interesting point, because we didn't actually get to what generation 3 is yet.
Yeah, I'm saving that
we're leading into that one. Whether you can see it or not, in the spectral view, there's a tick box that I can check that says hold color point. And if I hold the color point, what the system's going to do is it's going to try very hard to keep this light putting out what we see on the white surface as the same color. And if I use the adjustment buttons over here on the side, I can add and subtract colors. I can add red and subtract red, or make it warmer, make it cooler, desaturate, add brightness, those kinds of qualitative tools. And the interesting thing about this is that sometimes what you do over here doesn't translate literally into what you see happen on the spectrum. So I'm hoping I picked the right color, and that if I say I want less red in this color, red actually didn't move very much when I did that.
So let's switch to the fabric and the...
Oh, in fact.
Yes, good.
Let's try again. So if I say less red, when I tap that.
So you're reducing the red from
right.
the color.
And I'm reducing actually the amber LED significantly and a little bit of the red. If I pick, let's see, if I pick a pinker color and do the same thing, subtracting red from pink is hard to do. But what happens here is as I subtract red, if you look on the spectrum, what's actually happening is that my blue and cyan colors, actually my cyan color is raising up. So in order to subtract red, I'm not actually subtracting any red. I'm adding something at the other end of the spectrum to make that effect happen. I'm changing the recipe of this color to suit my design needs by using these qualitative tools on the side. So it's an interesting trick that you can play when you have all of the separate ingredients that an X7 system gives you to really craft the color that you want. And it's a kind of a new thing for people, and it's somewhat easy to get lost in this idea because you can think, now I can really make any color.
Yeah. RGB could be confusing, but these are 7
7-dimensional color mixing.
Yes.
It's a bit tweaky in the brain. But the interesting thing is if we talk about this kind of level of visualization and what that would actually mean, that's that third generation idea.
Yeah. Before we move on to third, I just want to touch another aspect here, which is the intensity.
Yeah.
So it's not just about the color or the hue of the individual colors, but also their intensities, because if they're not perfectly balanced, then when you turn on all of the colors, you may not get the perfect white, for instance.
Right.
So if the visualizer doesn't understand that, well, maybe the lime is more punchy than the amber, then when you start mixing them, you would also get this wrong result. So
right.
It's both about the hue and the intensity of the individual colors.
Right.
In fact, I think we have, should we do that? Yes, we have a few colors.
Yeah, to show the intensity.
Yeah, so we have a few colors programmed that we can go through. And if we go back to the view of the reality with visualization, as we step through the colors.
I hope this works, yes.
We are at white, and we're moving on. So you're going to see, as we're cycling through the colors, that they have different intensities.
Right. This is simply a chase of colors that are, it's essentially running around the color picker in the hue, a variable hue with full saturation. And it's just a very fast way to see that full saturation of these colors doesn't necessarily mean the same brightness in all cases. Yeah. We're not necessarily always running a single emitter. Some of these colors are made up of mixes, but you can see those different intensity levels certainly on the screen and certainly in capture, and they appear as jumps. And when you calculate the colors from a color picker or from a gel picker, as always to be the brightest version, it's the brightest version of that particular color. And that math can actually lead you astray, because one pixel on the color picker may have a certain brightness, and the brightest version of the very next pixel may in fact be not as bright or brighter than your original color. So simply fading across that color picker can cause these intensity jumps to happen when you're calculating always for the brightest version.
Because as you move across the colors available, when you leave one region and you go to another one, you effectively some of the LEDs may turn useless.
Yeah.
So the further up you go to the green, the less useful the red and blue are, which changes the intensity of the whole thing.
Right.
But you did mention that it would pick the brightest.
Well, you have a choice. We used to always calculate for the brightest because normally people like to think they want to get as much light out of a fixture as possible. And with LED technology especially, earlier versions, older technology, older LEDs that were in use simply weren't as bright as LEDs that you can buy today. So it really was a thing to get every lumen out of that fixture that you could. And so colors were picked using this brightest math. In the EOS color system, there's a button here at the top in the gel picker that allows you to choose what math you're going to use. And right now it's set to brightest, so we are in fact choosing things by the brightest math. But I can, toggle that to the best spectral match. Now you won't see anything change here because this is when I pick a color now. instead of picking the brightest possible mix of that color, it will pick the best mix to approximate that gel curve from the gel book.
So it has as much as possible for the wavelengths.
It will do the very best it can to have as much, of the wavelengths as it can, but in order to do that, it may not actually be the brightest version of that color that that fixture can create. So there's a third option. When you hit that key, it toggles into a setting called hybrid, which we hope is a very nice middle way between the brightest version and the spectral match, so that you get the benefits of both. But it is an issue in LEDs because of the variability of LEDs on their own, that you can get those kinds of brightness jumps from one color to the next. True.
Indeed. All right, so I'm checking here in case we have any questions, which I believe we do not so far. So if you have any questions, please just write them and we will try to address them as they pop up.
Yep.
So we did mention briefly what I call generation 3, and you've mentioned metamers.
Right.
Maybe...
Should we do an example of that?
Maybe we should do an example of this. So it's the idea that you can get the same color in different ways.
Right.
And you will see a difference in reality very much.
Oh, yes. Well, I do anyway, standing right here.
Yeah, so if we could switch so that we see the fabric and the visualization again, please.
So I've written 2 cues that are basically exactly what I explained before, with using just the red and the green LED to mix an amber color, and then just the amber LED out of our 7-color system to see the difference between these 2 shades of orange. And they're not exact. I can't mix the amber LED's position exactly using red and green, but they're quite close. And on the white surface, again, they're quite close, at least in real life. We hope that what you're seeing is reasonably similar, but anyway, what I'm seeing anyway here is that when I've got this particular amber color lighting up the screen and the fabric behind Lars over here, I see, on the one side, I see an orange or an amber light, and on the other side, I see a piece of fabric that is essentially red and green, because the red and green LED emitters are reflecting off of that fabric, not as a mixed color, but as their component parts. So when I look at this kind of a color mix, I say to myself, that looks pretty unnatural, because the green is popping so much and the red is popping so much, because those are the only ingredients I have in this color to reflect back into my eye. The next cue is using just the amber LED. And what I see on the fabric in real life is I see a very grayish, kind of flat version of this fabric.
It looks kind of dull.
It's very dull, and that's a function of this particular LED, which is reasonably broad spectrum, but not really, really broad spectrum. And it by itself, it's not a very good color, unless that's the color you're looking for in your design. It's like looking at a low pressure sodium light, right? The street lights that burn orange, right? Sometimes your show really needs that kind of flat color killing orange light. And in most cases, you would put a low pressure sodium lamp in your rig and use that to light that scene. Well, now with LED, you can do that straight away just with this system here, and essentially kill all those colors. So you can see, at least I can see, a real difference between that kind of amber and that kind of amber in real life. Now, what I hope you're seeing in the video is on the visualization side is that you see an orange light and you see a very similar orange light, but you're not seeing the same kind of pop coming out of the material on that surface. And Lars will now tell you why that's the case.
Yes, so we'll switch back here. So I spoke about what I call generation 1 and generation 2 color visualization before. And we're at generation 2 now with capture, but this does not allow us to observe this metamer effect of the 7-color system, because in fact internally in capture it is still just RGB. So in order to get the exact same result in capture, we would need to go beyond RGB and use 7 or more colors internally in the rendering pipeline, so to simulate, slicing up the rainbow in different pieces, and rather than just red, green, and blue, we would be looking at several channels, We could, in fact, do a lot of this already, but the issue is we don't have material data, we don't have texture information, which is multispectral.
Right.
So even if you go and buy a really expensive camera and you shoot in RAW, you'll be getting RGB data,
Right.
which doesn't cut it. So you would need to use multispectral cameras. They do exist, but it's the kind of technology that goes to the International Space Station when you're shooting space. So it's going to be a little bit over the budget for any stage production. And frankly, if you have the fabric and you want to do such detailed adjustments,
Right.
well, you can't take a picture of it unless you have it, so you're not working with sketches at this point.
Right.
So then, well, try it in reality at that.
Right. We haven't quite killed the light lab yet for those kinds of things.
Yeah.
So if this is an interesting tool in your design toolkit to play with color to this level where you're actually changing how colors are rendered on stage while trying to keep this same color point, a real world test of that costume or that scenery or whatever is probably going to be the best bet anyway, simply because of the time expense in trying to get it into something like capture. But
Yes.
definitely having the ability to get the right color out of the fixture in general is certainly a benefit, even with these very complex color systems nowadays.
Yes.
So I'm happy that, that you expanded your RGB space, certainly.
Let's wrap it up with taking a look at, we picked a few colors
Right.
that we would like to sort of showcase. And
I lost one.
we will want to see the live next to the capture as well. So Sarah, let's see.
Right. So I picked some tints actually, because the tints are using the full 7-color system, which you probably can't see anymore. But if we come back to the spectral version, you'll see that all 7 colors are in fact in use when we do these pale kinds of theatrical colors. So just for matching purposes, I picked these 3 tints to see how they look between capture and real life. And hopefully you're seeing a close match through all this technology layering that we've done for you. This is a Lee 138, which is a pale green color. It's got 80% transmission in real life. It's a green-white light. And then I have a Lee 205, which is one of our favorite color correction oranges. Again, with about 70% transmission on a conventional light. But here, a full color spectrum version of a warm white color. And then a Lee 202 classic daylight color temperature correction. Again, showing a pretty decent match, I think, between the fabric and the white surface in both capture and live.
Indeed. All right, at that point,
How's our audience doing?
our audience seems content.
Oh, well, that's good. We like that.
We have no questions actually, which is either a good sign or a bad sign.
Well,
I hope yes, great. So I think we'll wrap it up.
okay.
Yes, thank you very much for coming.
You're very welcome. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you. Indeed, it was. And I'd also like to wish everyone Merry Christmas or Happy Holidays or whatever you're celebrating over the coming weeks. And also give a shout out to Intersonic, who have helped us with a bit of hardware here today.
Absolutely.
Great. So thank you very much for watching, and thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.